Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Frontline on the Battle Ready Network. I'm Colonel David Gimono, along with my co-host, Pulitzer Prize nominated investigative journalist Troy Anderson. As always, Troy, it's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here, Colonel.
You can also follow us on Facebook and subscribe to Battle Ready Ministries on YouTube and watch the Roku TV Remnant channel with Pastor Todd Coconato. And please sign up for our Battle Ready newsletter at battle-ready.org. Today, we have a very interesting show. And I first caught wind of this just several weeks ago, and I saw a video of Pilot Billy Cranford giving his testimony of what happened on one fateful day, that he found himself in a very precarious and deadly situation in the air with a single engine aircraft. And as he was piloting his guest, I believe, and Billy, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, from Florida to Georgia, on a very routine mission, things went very, very wrong. Billy, it's good to have you on the show today.
It's good to be here, and thank you, Colonel David, for having me.
We're having you because I just sensed, as I was watching you give your testimony on that video, that people really need to understand that the life that we're living is really a life that many times unseen forces are around us. And you found out that. But before we get into that, Billy, tell us what happened that day. You were getting ready to fly. Tell us about your prep, your flight, your aircraft, and tell us just about the kinds of things you normally do to get ready to fly. Where were you and where were you going?
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Me and a friend had just spent a long weekend down at Anna Maria Island, and I was leaving out of Tampa St. Pete. And I was checking the weather all morning long, like all pilots will do. And we had an overcast ceiling, about 2,000 feet or so. And so I decided to file an IFR flight plan to get out and get on top of the ceiling. And so after driving to the airport and calling the airport on the way and asking them to top off the airplane, got there and just did my normal routine walk around, where we check all the safety items and, make sure they put the fuel cap on, make sure we've got oil in there and, just all the good stuff that we check. We sump the fuel and things like that. And so we departed out of Tampa St. Pete somewhere about 11 o'clock or so. And I wanted to do a direct flight, which basically kind of cuts the concave of Florida, just direct from Tampa St. Pete all the way to Noonan, Georgia. And we got on top and we were, given 8,000 feet. And at one time we moved up to 9,000 because we got into some clouds and then came back down. So, the flight was supposed to be about 2 hours and 30 minutes, and 2 hours and 20 minutes into it, things changed.
So, Billy, tell us about the type of aircraft you were flying and how many passengers you had with you that day.
So I had one passenger. It's a Piper Commanche PA-24. It's about 190 mile an hour airplane, retractable gear, had been redone from tip to toe and had a fresh engine. And actually was fresh out of annual for about 30, 40 hours previously, which means that every year we tear them apart and look at them from, under a microscope. And so it was a very comfortable. The avionics were upgraded. It's just a real comfortable, fast airplane.
And nothing seemed to be out of sorts or unusual on that particular day, was there?
No, actually, it was quite the opposite. Everything was actually going extremely well. And matter of fact, a few minutes before we had difficulty, I looked over at my passenger. I said, "Man, this thing is such a smooth airplane." And then a few minutes later, it proved to be differently.
Hey, before we go on, Troy, did you have any questions for Billy about the flight or things that were happening at this point?
Or maybe if you could give our audience a little background about yourself, your years' experience of flying, how you became a pilot.
Yeah, well, back in 1999, I decided I was going to get my pilot's license, and since then, I've added, in addition to the private pilot, I've added IFR, which is instrument, multi-engine, and I'm a helicopter pilot as well. So I've been flying, I guess, a total of at that time about 23 years.
So you're not a novice.
Well, there's a lot of guys out there, I'm not Top Gun either, right? So there's a lot of guys out there that are, that do it for a living. I've done it for fun and sport, but I've always taken it very serious, thus getting the instrument ratings and the different ratings that just kind of give us a license to learn and kind of perfect our game.
So when you're not flying, what kinds of things are you doing?
Well, I'm a home builder by trade. Other hobbies are, I'm into fitness, which praise God that paid off during the recovery for sure. Spend a lot of time with family.
Oh, that's great. So you're in the air, and how long were you in the air before you noticed something was going wrong?
So we were flying about 2 hours and about 20 minutes or so, and give or take a couple of minutes. And we just came out of Jacksonville Center. As you're flying along, you have these different areas that'll take you. I was under an IFR flight plan, which means I was talking to somebody and they were watching every move I made the whole time. And so Jacksonville Center had told me to come down from 8,000 down to 5,000, getting ready to come into our home airport in Noonan, Georgia, and told me to contact Atlanta once I got down to 5,000 feet and check in with them. And Atlanta would take me from that point on home. So I did exactly that, got 5,000, got established, contacted Atlanta and checked in, and, things were going great. And I guess about a minute or so after check-in, I was running at 2,350 RPMs. And then all of a sudden, the engine dropped down to 1,500 RPMs. But my heart skipped a couple of beats, and I immediately went into the emergency procedures mode, fuel pump on, mixture rich, props full, fuel tanks on both, those kind of things like that. Well, at the same time, ATC was calling me and telling me to get down to 3,000. Air traffic control was calling me.
Air traffic control, okay.
Yeah, telling me to get down to 3,000, getting prepared to come into my home airport. Well, I ignored them. I was a little busy at that time and trying to figure out what was going on. And about 45 seconds later, they called me again and asked me a little nicer to get down. And at that point, the airplane was running really smooth, but it was only giving me 1,500 RPMs.
Let me ask you this, Billy. From 2,350 to 1,500 RPM, does that ever happen to you before?
No, it hadn't. And it was extremely unusual because it was like the engine was running extremely smooth. We've all been on lawnmowers or something like that where we have a mechanical issue or even run out of gas. For the record, I had plenty of fuel, and the investigation afterward proved that. But it just dropped down and it was just smooth. And of course, the problem is that I wasn't able to maintain altitude at those RPMs. But it was extremely unusual.
Troy, your thoughts on that particular event?
What did you think was happening when the RPMs dropped like this?
And Troy, I'd never experienced that before. So, we're taught to do all the emergency procedures. You think fuel, air, and spark is kind of the process. So make sure your mag's on, fuel pump, mixture rich, everything like that. And and it ran that way for about maybe 2 minutes and 20 seconds. And people ask me, well, how do you know that's the timetable? Because I was talking to ATC the whole time, and I'd always planned that if anything was to ever happen, I wanted to document it. And so I was documenting it through communication. I told them when I had a complete engine failure. And first I told them I was having problems. And then 2 minutes and 20-ish seconds later, the engine went from 1,500. And at that time, it was running at 1,500. I was dropping about 400 to 600 feet per minute, which isn't a big deal. That's a little steeper than a normal approach when you're coming in on an aircraft to land, but it wasn't allowing me to climb. So, I made the call, told them I had some problems. I wanted to divert to a closer airport, and that I was going to declare an emergency, and I wanted them to vector me toward that closer airport, which just means they're going to tell me where to turn, how to turn, all that good stuff.
Well, so at that point, it went from 1,500 down to 500. Is that correct?
That is correct. It went from, about 2 minutes, 20 seconds later, it rolled down to 500. And then about 3 seconds later, it rolled down to 0.
Whoa.
Yeah. And so I went from losing about, 400 to 600 feet per minute to about 1,100 feet per minute,
Wow.
which is I jokingly say the Piper Commanche was a very fast airplane, but it glides like a crowbar does. And it basically glides straight down. So when it did that, I immediately try to restart, and I announced to ATC, Air Traffic Control, that I had an engine failure, and the restart was not possible because I tried and the engine it was just seized up. And so at that point, I was looking, all right, at that point I had the field made. But then as I started gliding closer and I was losing so much altitude, landing in that field was just no longer a possibility. And I announced that to Air Traffic Control. And I saw a field somewhere about my 11 o'clock position. And I turned the aircraft toward there, and I told Air Traffic Control, I'm not going to make the runway. I'm going to do an emergency landing in this field. And Air Traffic Control, those guys are trained to keep conversation down to a minimum. And they just responded, Roger. So I turned toward this field that was at my 11 o'clock position. As I started getting closer to it, I saw these hay bales that started coming into focus. And there's these, if you guys ever passed a country hay field, they'll wrap them in white plastic, to preserve them and what have you. So I started seeing these big, huge hay bales. Well, for a second, I thought, well, I'm just going to kind of pick my way between it if possible, because we were in the middle of nowhere and there was not another option.
So, Billy, every time I've been in some situation, of course, I've been at war and been into some difficult circumstances, it seems like to me, when I get into a real difficult situation, time slowed down. Like everything looked like it was going in slow motion. Is that the case now? What's going on with you at that particular point, or not?
Yeah, well, at that particular point, it was actually quite the opposite. It was happening at such a rapid pace. Now, when moments later, as I'm approaching that field, and there again, we're dropping 1,100 feet per minute, which is drastic. And so time was just zooming by. And I told my passenger, I said, we're not going to make this field, because as I started getting closer and I saw the hay bales, I thought, well, I'm going to pick my way between it. But then I saw power lines that were crisscrossing the field that came into focus as I got closer, and that was just a no-go at that point. So I looked over to my right and I picked the least dense thing that I could find, and it appeared to be an old bootleg-shaped logging road that had grown up, but it was a lot less dense than everything else around it. And I told my passenger, I said, we're not going to make the field. I'm going to put it on this logging road. We are going to crash. This is going to hurt.
Were prayers going up at that time, Billy?
In all honesty, my passenger was definitely praying. The passenger was praying out loud. I was flying an airplane, right. And when there were moments where I asked God for help, but it wasn't like I was in continual prayer.
Right.
But then when I hit the logging road, I actually got into the trees, and I was at that point, as you've experienced, time just came to a crawl. It was just incredibly slow motion, and which is one reason that I remember every single second of it, because it slowed down. Well, you've been there.
Oh, yes. How fast were you going at the time that you were going to hit the field and the crash?
I had put it on 100 miles an hour, which is what the manufacturer says is the best glide ratio for the airplane. In other words, if you have an engine out, it's your best opportunity to glide the furthest you can. But when I started seeing my options were limited, I was doing my very best to slow it down without creating a stall. And so the old logging road was kind of a bootleg in shape. I had the little short first part of the boot and then veered to the right. And I remember as I was into the trees, I saw this big wall of trees before me. I saw where the smaller trees ended and the bigger trees began. And I had to do a really hard bank. And as I was in that really hard bank, I looked down at my airspeed to make sure that I wasn't going to stall, because if you stall in that, it was certain death. And at that time, I was doing 65 miles or 65 knots, which is about 78 miles an hour. And,
Troy, we've all been in difficult positions before, and as Billy's relating this, I'm going back in my own very difficult times in war, and bullets are flying and things are happening and things are slowing down. There was one point we were at 6 Blackhawks flying over Baghdad and we're getting shot at and things are exploding and everything just slowed down to it was unbelievable, just like Billy's talking about. Troy, your thoughts on all that?
Well, yeah, it just brings to mind when my dad was in the Korean War. He was on a plane that caught fire and they all had to jump out in their parachutes. And I just remember when I was a kid, we would never fly anywhere. We drove everywhere after that.
By the way, Billy, I was on a C-130, which is a 4-prop military transport plane, smaller one. And we took off and immediately touched down in the middle of the desert in Iraq. And I go to the crew chief, what happened? And the crew chief says, sir, we didn't realize, but we were carrying munitions that exploded 10,000 feet. And he said, if we had crossed that 10,000 foot barrier, we'd not be here right now.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I've been into some terrible situations, but man, I'm with you. Going back to the story, you're headed to the trees. Things aren't looking good. What happened?
Yeah, so as I was banking, I'm in the trees, and one of the sounds that I'll never forget, that I never want to hear again, this is what it sounds like when trees hit the wings of an airplane. It's just a very unusual sound. And so as I'm in the bank, I straighten it out, and I could see above the trees where I was at. I could see the larger trees were kind of at the end. And I remember thinking it. My passenger said that I said it, so obviously I did. I said, I've got to put it down, because I knew that if I did not get the airplane on the ground and we hit the bigger trees, there was no chance of survival. And so I pushed the airplane forward to get it down. And then I'm just guessing where the bottom or the floor is. And then I flare real hard to pull it back to try to pull all the energy out of it. So when I do that, the tail hits really, really hard on the ground. And then as it hits hard on the ground, the front end, it uses kind of a pivot, and the front end slams down really hard. And at that point, it appears that my seatbelt either broke or came off. And there again, everything was just happening in super slow motion. And I remember coming up, and I remember, going up and hitting the top of my head and thinking, wow, that hurt, but hey, I didn't break my neck. It was my thought process.
Wow.
Then I come back down, and my butt goes all the way through the seat and hits the floor.
Wow.
And when it did, I remember thinking, man, that hurt. I just broke my back. Then as the airplane's starting to come to a skidding halt, all the G-forces throws me forward. Now, mind you, I'm still flying the airplane. I have one hand on the yoke, one hand on the throttle. And I see the windshield coming, and I wince up and I hit it really hard. And I remember thinking, man, that hurt. Well, I fly back, and the back of my head hits the back part, the metal rail on the seat. And I would just remember how excruciating that pain was. Well, then it was kind of a gift of God. There was my right wingtip caught a little larger tree, and it threw the airplane to the left, and which gave us just a little bit more room of what we needed before we hit the big trees. And then I come up and I hit the left side of the windshield. I fly back, I hit the same spot on the seat with the same part of my head. And I'm
So
thinking,
you're going back and forth at this time? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, I am.
Wow.
Yeah, and my passenger whose seatbelt did not break and who was able to brace said that it looked like I was just like in a washing machine getting thrown everywhere. And so I fly back, I hit the same spot on the back of the seat. And then as I'm coming forward, I see the yoke coming, but I can't do anything about it. And so as soon as I hit the yoke, I'm out, airplane comes to a stop. My passenger, who was medically trained, said that I quit breathing for sometime up to 3 minutes.
Wow.
And they just started praying, God, please don't let him die here. Don't let him die. And I remember waking back up. I don't ever remember dying because I don't believe that I did, but I remember waking back up, and it was kind of a little thing where I was kind of catching my breath and catching my senses and like this and looking around, and I'm bleeding really profusely. I had 47 stitches eventually across my forehead. And
wow.
Yeah, God's done an amazing work in healing it. Probably on film, you're not going to see it at all.
Now, Billy, this happened about a year ago, correct?
June
Just to get the
26th.
time frame?
Yes, sir. It's probably 1 year and 1 year, 1 week, or probably 1 year and 2 weeks ago, close to it by now.
So you got 47 stitches. What else? What other kind of injuries did you sustain in this crash?
So my skull broke in 6 places, and it was all the places that it hit. My head swelled, or my brain swelled. And just to show you how God can use brokenness, if my skull would not have cracked, my brain would have had no place to swell. So my skull breaking actually was a gift. So my skull broke in 6 places. My face fractured in 7 places. My back broke in 4 places. I broke a thumb, I broke an elbow, I broke a rib, and did some pretty good dental damage. And of course, 40 some odd stitches across my forehead.
Now, you didn't know all of that when this happened. You were in a state of probably shock, and you didn't know what was going on. Is that correct?
Well, initially, when I came back to, I was trying to get my bearings, and my passenger said, we've got to get some help. I started looking around, and I said, I don't think so. I think this is just a dream. And they said, no, Billy, this is not a dream. We've been in an airplane crash.
Wow.
And so I quickly came to my senses, and, of course I was bleeding everywhere. So I saw some of that. And then at that point, my radios had gotten knocked off. I dropped off radar anyway, so they weren't sure where we were. I had a cell phone that miraculously stayed in a pouch that I kept. So I was able to grab it and call 911.
You were able to have enough energy, sense, and wherewithal to grab a phone and call 911. Wow.
Oh, it was a gift of God. Yeah. If you hear the 911 tapes, it's and I've gotten a copy of them, so I hear all basically 51 minutes of it from the time that I called to the time that they found us. And amazingly, I was actually talking very reasonable, except I had no idea where I was.
So you called 911, but how did people know where you were?
Well, 911, first of all, they were surprised. They said, or surprised. They said, you had a what? And, that's not a call they get every day, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, simultaneously, the Atlanta Air Traffic Control, those guys did an amazing job. They called and dispatched a friend of theirs that had an airplane down in the area to go look for us. So 911 was like, do you have a flare? We don't know where you are. And so after a few back and forth, and I didn't have a flare, I told 911, I said, I want to drop a pin to my son, Tyler. This is his number. Call him. So as I tried to grab my phone and read it, I had so much blood that's going everywhere that I couldn't read my phone. I actually handed my phone to the passenger, said, will you drop, my son a pin? And they got the phone, and not knowing how to operate that phone, they inadvertently took about a 5-second video of me inside the cockpit.
Wow.
So, that's kind of eerie when you see it, for sure. So 911 ended up calling my son. He gave them the coordinates. And there was a total time elapse, about 51 minutes. And we were so deep in the woods, they had to get chainsaws to cut trees. They had a local farmer. They had a bush hog. They brought him down. And when they brought him down, they actually put me on a backboard, put me on the back of a bush hog, and carried me to an awaiting helicopter.
That must have been an exciting ride.
Colonel David, that was the most painful ride I ever remember. On the back of a bush hog, going through just the woods and getting bumped around. And I remember asking them, hey, can you go a little smoother? And the guy goes, man, this is as slow as this thing will go.
Wow. Troy, can you imagine you're in a crash, you're bleeding, you're disoriented, you're getting drugged by a bush hog, all this stuff happening. Your thoughts, man?
I mean, it sounds like all these terrible injuries. Did you wonder, am I going to survive this? Am I going to make it here?
Troy, I never thought of it. I've had people ask me that, but I never thought I was going to die. I remember going back several months later, 8 or 9 months later. I actually took a helicopter ride with a friend of mine who's another helicopter pilot, and we flew the same path that my airplane was on just to see it and film it. And when we flew, I remembered all the thoughts that came back to me. And I remember going into the logging road trees and thinking, I've got to do everything I can to save my passenger's life. And I actually saw the point to where people get resolved to this as their fate. I came to that point, and I remember that. And I remember just not accepting it. And I never had any fear that I was going to die. If you hear the air traffic control communication, I'm fairly calm. My passenger says that I was remarkably calm. But it was just the peace of God that I just knew. I mean, the Lord's always taken care of me. He's always protected me. And it was that assurance that he was, and that I had to do everything that was in my power, my responsibility to the passenger to make sure their life was saved. Yeah, but I never thought I was going to die.
Interesting concept, ladies and gentlemen. I don't know where you are right now in your life, but if things are real difficult, remember one thing: God is still on the throne. God is in charge of everything and everyone, no matter what your circumstance. If you'll turn to him right now and say, Lord, help me, he will do that. And just like Billy was in an extremely difficult situation, yet God was there. Keep going, Bill. We have a few more minutes. We're going to really, this first episode, we're going to get to, probably to the place where you go to the hospital and all that. But the second episode, we're going to talk about what really happened in the spiritual realm, that people are going to be completely blown away. But so you're being taken to the bush hog. What happened then?
So they take me to the waiting helicopter, and they ended up putting me on a helicopter. And I was very adamant that I wanted to keep up with my telephone because I knew I was going to have to contact my children. So I was remembering names. Okay, well, what's your name? You've got my cell phone. Okay, what's your name now? You've got it. And so they gave me a ride all the way up to Atlanta Trauma Hospital, Wellstar at the time. It's since closed down. But they got me inside the emergency room, and I knew I was in trouble because of all the attention I was getting. And this guy, I looked at him and I go, man, where's all this blood coming from laying there in the emergency room? And he goes, hey man, give me your phone. So I handed him my phone, and he took a couple of pictures, and I looked at those pictures and I said, man, this isn't good. He said, man, you were tore up. And I was like, gee, thanks, man. Appreciate the vote of confidence there.
Yeah, you didn't need that at that time. I can tell you that.
Right. I needed somebody to say, hey, man, you're going to be all right. Because, man, you're tore up. But
Yeah.
but what it did was it thrust me into prayer. And I said, Heavenly Father, Lord, you don't waste a minute of this hurt. Let people see you through me during this whole time.
Wow.
And from that moment on, for the next, I was in ICU for 5.5 days. I can tell you that God showed up. There were people that were coming to my room and, say, hi, I'm so-and-so, I'm your new nurse for the day or the evening or whatever. And without exception, they'd say, so what happened? And I'd say, well, I had a plane crash. Well, without exception, they would just kind of turn around and come to the side of my bed. And so one evening, this lady walks in and she's this little younger nurse. And she said, hi, my name is so-and-so. I'm going to be your nurse for the evening. And she said, so what happened? I said, I had a plane crash. Well, she literally dropped her marker where she was writing on the board. She comes stand beside my bed and said, can you talk about it? I go, sure, I'll be glad to. She said, we just don't get plane crash survivors up here. If we do, they can't talk. I said, I'll be glad to tell you anything. So at that point, I just felt the Holy Spirit just taking over. And I started telling her about it. And I said this. I said, my Father, Jesus Christ, came down and spared my life. And I looked at her and I said, you know who he is? And she said, I was raised Muslim, but I want to know what truth is.
Mm.
And I called her name and said, can I pray with you? And she said, yes, please. And I prayed and I felt the Holy Spirit just praying through me. And I remember praying, Lord, show her that you are the way, the truth, and the life. And I opened up my eyes and she's bawling, just tears flowing. And she said, I just want to know what truth is.
Amen. Well, brother, we got to stop for right now. We're going to continue episode 2. We're going to talk all about what the doctor said, what God showed you, and stay tuned for episode 2. You don't want to miss 1 second. Meanwhile, I have a question for all of you. Are you battle ready?